Hey there, cool teachers. I am here with my colleague, Dr. Norm Friesen, and we have a kind of a shared interest that I think that you're going to be interested in. The question is the lecture dead? Or why is the lecture dead? Or is really there's something there that we need to pay close attention to? And he's been thinking about this topic a lot. So if you're somebody who talks in your class, who likes to share knowledge verbally, or to even have your students do it, let's kind of break this down a little bit because I think it's important. So the first question, is the lecture dead?
No, the lecture is definitely not dead.
It's not?
No, because we have MOOCs now, and everybody talks about MOOCs having lectures on them, video lectures that students can watch. We have the flipped classroom where the lecture is still something that happens, but it's supposed to happen at home on video.
Right.
And we even have stuff like
TED Talks.
Yes, of course. TED Talks. So
yeah.
obvious. So people are like raving about TED Talks.
Oh, yeah.
And what they're doing is they're watching a 10, 12, 17-minute lecture.
Highly entertaining.
Yeah.
Very thoughtful, well constructed. So lectures have been around in education for an awful long time, right?
Yes.
Where do they come from?
Well, it all started back in the Middle Ages. If you believe it or not.
As it all does.
Yes.
Middle Ages, yeah, sorry.
So what happened there was books were rare. There were just basically, you would have to just copy them by hand.
They're scribed. They're scribed books. They were not
nobody
printed.
even knew whether any one book was an edition or whether it was accurate, or nobody could improve on one edition of a book. None of this stuff existed. There was no such thing as a publication date. Nothing. So it was a really different world. And so the lecture came up in this context, and it served its own really interesting function, which was basically to have people read in front of a class a book like Plato, like a book in the Bible, something like that, and have the class write it down, or write parts of it down, or make their own, detailed notes.
Okay, so if you were a seminarian, it would not be uncommon for the rector or other teacher to get up and to just read, so that you could, for the first time, experience that text. And somebody was giving it to you, and you then would internalize it.
Yeah, and
it was transfer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it wasn't even necessarily always a matter of copying everything down. People would go in and listen. They would say, like, I've gone to this book of Plato 3 times. And they'd have to go multiple times to hear the same book read over the course of their studies. So the idea was basically you try to memorize the things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's really, really cool. And that was the Middle Ages. But what happened when the printing press came out? Why didn't the lecture die then, when people could get their own copies?
Well, people actually thought it would die.
Really?
Yeah. There were some people who were saying, like one guy asked, why should old men be preferred to their juniors now that it is possible for the young, by diligent study, to acquire the same knowledge? So what he's saying is, why go and listen to an old guy holding forth in front of everybody when you can just grab the book and read it and find out right away?
You can pull it from the Library of Alexandria or wherever you were getting it in 1500.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is really interesting. But it didn't die. People still preferred to do that, even though there was criticism. And we had these new mobile versions, right? I mean, to draw the parallel to present, these mobile versions of the information. We still would go and get it. Did it change at all, or was it kind of still the same?
Well, it actually remained the same for quite a long time.
Maybe it kind of still is the same. But go
I
ahead.
hope not. I really hope not, because I wouldn't be talking about the lecture as something that's interesting and still relevant if it were quite that bad. But I think that it's really extremely adaptable. So what happened is that the lecture really did stay the same for quite a while. So the whole world was changing. I mean, in Europe, all of Europe was just a battleground basically for a century.
Yeah.
And but the lecture remained the same, and it did start to change a little bit though, because what happened is people were reading. The old lecturer would be reading something, but he would then, or it was always he in that case.
Yeah, in those days,
would then sometimes explain. And what were called, they would sometimes go into digressions or what were called glosses.
Glosses, okay.
Yeah. And so a gloss is basically just something where you talk about the text while you're actually focused on the text itself, and you're just sort of saying, well, this was the case at the time, and this is why he's saying that, or this links to something else, whatever. Those types of
Right,
comments.
adding the context that's not present in the text based on their
Exactly.
knowledge, because they're dealing
Exactly.
with more and more. It's not just the Bible in these days; it's manuscripts and text, and they're actually starting to make those connections. But I think teachers do really well right now. They add that context to the dialogue in the lecture that's not present in whatever it is that you're looking at.
Exactly. And so this function of in a teaching scenario, making something present right now,
Yeah.
that remains absolutely central. So in some ways, this idea of the gloss is something that's still important and kind of reenacted, reinterpreted today for our own purposes. Because you got to take something that you're reading, like in an English class, if you're reading something from the 19th century, you got to say, okay, well, this is relevant today. How? Let's think about that. So,
Yeah, that's really cool. So how does it progress? How do we get to where we are today with TED Talks, for example?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any way to understand what's going on in a TED Talk without looking back at one important turning point in the lecture, and that is 1800.
Okay.
And what people started to do then...
Romantic period.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. What people started to do then was actually to say, okay, no, I'm not going to lecture on any other text. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lecture on my own philosophy. So people were really big into, various types of philosophies, various systems, whether they were in education or in philosophy itself or anything else.
And you were picking them up at the coffee houses, cafes, and pubs. You're having those people were saying, oh, have you heard about... It was almost like it was fashionable to have new ideas that that you could then share with other people.
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement and a lot of the French Revolution just happened, the American Revolution happened. People thought the world is changing for the better, so there was a lot of excitement, and this was reflected in the lecture. So what happened is people started to say, okay, no, I am going to lecture on my ideas, and so they would actually stand in front of the podium and actually extemporize on their own philosophy and kind of create their own philosophy right at the podium. Right. So it became this place where people would speak, and they could speak in a way that I think we think of public speaking today, right?
Right.
You could look at a few notes on a piece of paper. You could also just speak freely if you had a bunch of things in your mind that you rehearsed or were really familiar with, and so people were really excited. People called this one lecturer named Fichte, they said that he was rapturous and extraordinary. And these are other intellectuals of the time who were saying this kind of thing. So,
and you had mentioned, that he just kind of worked from, rather than a script of any kind or pages of notes, a single note with a few keywords on it that to keep him kind of centered.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me a lot of some of the Romantic composers, specifically Franz Liszt, who would write a piece of music, but only give himself a few sketches, or sometimes approach the piano with no sketches at all, and he would sit down to play his music a lot like a jazz musician would today, with the themes in mind, but often it would go in different directions, and he would play around with it and often create something new that he hadn't imagined before he came to perform it. So that's what makes me think of the lecturer as a performer, and this is the period, Fichte, is being one of those examples of someone who was a performer with thought.
Exactly. And the Romantic era was a time when people would see themselves, the artist would see himself as kind of like almost like a god, a creator of new worlds. So Fichte would said at one of his lectures where he was comparing the dead written letter to the spirit of speaking, and he said that my concern today has been to not to like focus on what is in printed books for us to read, but what has stirred and transformed our spirit. And his greatest hope was to succeed in scattering in the souls of his audience, or in your souls, he says, fiery sparks which can arouse and stir them.
Wow.
So he really wanted to get people excited. And that was his key goal. And I think that you think about the type of terms that people use to talk about talks like ignites, or even TED Talks. What's their? They have a tagline, which essentially is something like "Start a Revolution" or something like that. And so they're really interested in something that Fichte was an expert at. More than 200 years ago. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. So how do we get from that point to this point, or are we kind of there?
I think we're already pretty close, because one of the key reasons why we have lectures is precisely because of that, trying to make that connection. trying to go through a performance, a kind of an event that also can inspire us.
So, for teachers out there who lecture, who like that part of it, how do they do it well? How do they do it and not lose their students in the process? Yeah.
Well, I think we can look even to the most recent sort of stage in the history of the lecture, which is one where the lecture's been looked at by sociologists and of course by plenty of educators and instructional designers and other experts. And one of the things that Irving Goffman, who is a sociologist in the 60s and 70s, said that what's really important in a lecture is creating the illusion of fresh talk.
Yeah.
So there's nothing more boring than hearing somebody read something in front of you.
Yes.
And I don't know how they handled it in the Middle Ages, but
they probably fell asleep a little bit.
They did.
Yeah.
Did. Actually, if you look at the images, they always have birch switches so that they can wake people up. So yeah, it was clearly a problem then. So what you need to do, Goffman says, is you need to create this illusion of fresh talk when you're speaking. It needs to sound spontaneous. So he says your effective speaker is someone who has written his reading text in the spoken register to make it sound like natural speech. Yep. And that is something you figure out by actually reading it aloud.
By rehearsing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses the phrase, he has tied himself in advance to his upcoming audience with a typewriter ribbon. So
Ooh.
It's all about preparing your text in advance and knowing your text.
Knowing your text. And as we were discussing before, knowing it well enough from rehearsing it to have made alterations in it for things that don't sound natural, right?
Yeah.
So that it does sound like free text.
Exactly. So one of the things that I think probably a lot of people are wondering is, well, what about technology? How does our digital world actually fit in with this? And what I would say is that when you think about a lot of the technologies that are really effective, even ones we have around us when we're shooting this show, are things that allow us to create this illusion of fresh talk more easily.
Fresh talk. Okay. Yeah.
So I have my notes here in front of me. There's things like teleprompters.
Which we have one here, which you guys can't see, but don't worry about it.
And all sorts of other sort of tricks that people use when they're giving a talk. And you could say that all of those things are meant to contribute in one way or another to creating the illusion of fresh talk. That's
cool. Is there any other advice that you have for people who are going to lecture?
I would say that one, besides this whole idea of making it seem spontaneous, and with the idea that you actually just have to make it seem spontaneous. It can't, for it to actually be spontaneous, you'd have to be pretty good and maybe have done it for maybe 20 years or something.
But it's a skill. It's a skill that you develop over time
Absolutely.
and with practice. It's not something that can happen immediately.
Yeah, so what I read in the literature, and I've looked at the literature on lecturing to large audiences and this sort of thing, or large classes, and they say, okay, what you want to do is you want to connect, you want to practice the art of the gloss. You want to connect what you're talking about to things that are important for your audience today, right? And also even just important to you, right? They want to hear about you. You're in front of them. Your text is not in front of them. You are, or their textbook, or anything else. And so you want to talk about yourself too, like make yourself real to them, make it feel like, okay, they're interested in this person, and so they're interested in what they have to say.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, folks, questions, comments, other ideas that we may have missed, perfect for the comments down below. We would love to have your interaction here, and we'll even make him jump on the Facebook maybe and answer some of these if you got questions. This has been really, really cool. You know that I geek on this stuff big time.
Oh, yes.
As much speaking as I get a chance to do. And so this is really wonderful to know more about the history of it, but also to know that it's not going away. And that maybe the criticism that people have is that it's gone too far back to the way it used to be in the Middle Ages, and it's not this fresh, gloss, romantic version that is so infectious in something like a TED Talk. So thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. All right, and we'll see you guys soon.
Bye.
Thank you.